The rural landscape of Plainfield, Wisconsin exuded an aura of tranquility, a place where the hustle and bustle of city life seemed a distant memory. Rolling hills stretched as far as the eye could see, creating a picturesque backdrop that seemed almost timeless. Fields of corn swayed gently in the breeze, their golden stalks whispering secrets of the land. Life moved at a slower pace here. Neighbors knew each other, and there was a sense of community that bound everyone together. People greeted each other with a smile on the dusty roads, their interactions filled with warmth and familiarity. It was in this idyllic setting that Ed Gein, an unassuming man, lived a seemingly ordinary life, blending into the fabric of the community. Few could have imagined the darkness that lurked beneath his unremarkable facade, a darkness that would eventually come to light in the most horrifying way. Ed was a peculiar character, often the subject of whispers and sideways glances, his odd behavior making him a topic of local gossip. He was a recluse, preferring the solitude of his dilapidated farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a place that seemed to mirror his own isolation. His days were spent in quiet labor, tending to his chores with an almost robotic efficiency, his movements methodical and precise. While he wasn't known to be particularly social, he wasn't unfriendly either. He would exchange pleasantries with his neighbors, maintaining a veneer of normalcy. He would occasionally help out his neighbors with odd jobs, his awkward demeanor and shy smile disarming any suspicion that might have arisen. Beneath the surface of this seemingly harmless exterior, however, lay a mind teetering on the precipice of madness, a mind that harbored unspeakable thoughts. Ed Gein harbored secrets dark and disturbing within the confines of his isolated farmhouse, secrets that would eventually shock the world. His existence was a tangled web of repressed desires, fueled by an unhealthy obsession with his deceased mother and a growing fascination with death itself, a combination that would prove to be deadly. The tranquil facade he presented to the world masked a chilling reality that would soon send shockwaves through the heartland of America, a reality that was as horrifying as it was unbelievable. The story of Ed Gein is not one for the faint of heart. It is a tale that delves into the darkest corners of the human psyche. It is a tale of psychological descent, of macabre fascination, and of the thin veil that separates sanity from the abyss of human depravity, a veil that Ed Gein ultimately tore asunder. To understand the monster that Ed Gein would become, one must first delve into the twisted roots of his upbringing. The rural Wisconsin landscape, with its isolation and harsh winters, set the stage for a life that would be anything but ordinary. His childhood was far from idyllic, overshadowed by the domineering presence of his mother, Augusta Gein. She was a woman whose stern demeanor and unyielding beliefs cast a long, dark shadow over her family. A woman of strict religious convictions and a staunch belief in the evils of the world, Augusta ruled their household with an iron fist. Her interpretation of the Bible was rigid and unforgiving, painting a world filled with sin and corruption. She instilled in her sons, Ed and Henry, a deep fear of God and a profound distrust of women whom she considered instruments of sin and temptation. This belief system was drilled into them from a young age, leaving little room for personal growth or independent thought. Augusta's influence over Ed was particularly strong. Her words were law, and her approval was the only validation he sought. She kept him isolated from the outside world, limiting his social interactions and instilling in him a sense of shame and inadequacy. The walls of their home became both a physical and emotional prison for young Ed. Ed, starved for affection and approval, clung to his mother as his only source of solace and guidance. In his eyes, she was the ultimate authority, the one person who could do no wrong. He idolized her, internalizing her every word and adopting her twisted worldview as his own. Her teachings became the foundation upon which his entire understanding of the world was built. As Ed grew older, his dependence on his mother morphed into an unhealthy obsession. He became increasingly detached from reality, his world revolving solely around Augusta. He became her caretaker, tending to her every need with an almost fanatical devotion. This role further isolated him from the outside world, deepening his emotional dependence on her. Their relationship, however, remained deeply dysfunctional, marked by Augusta's constant berating and Ed's submissive acceptance of her abuse. Her harsh words and unrelenting criticism chipped away at his already fragile self-esteem. He was trapped in a suffocating cycle of emotional dependence, unable to break free from the iron grip of his mother's control. The outside world became a distant, unattainable dream. The seeds of Ed Gein's madness were sown in the fertile ground of this toxic relationship. Every harsh word, every act of control pushed him further into a dark, twisted reality. Augusta's relentless indoctrination warped his perception of the world, leaving him ill-equipped to navigate the complexities of human relationships. He lacked the social skills and emotional resilience needed to form healthy connections with others. Her death, when it came, would shatter the fragile foundation of his psyche, unleashing the demons that had long simmered beneath the surface. Without her, Ed was left adrift, his mind unraveling as he struggled to cope with the loss of the only person who had ever mattered to him. A mind unhinged, Augusta's death, and Ed's descent. The year 1945 marked a turning point in Ed Gein's life, a descent into the abyss from which he would never truly return. It was a year that would forever alter the course of his existence, plunging him into a darkness that he could never escape. His brother Henry died under mysterious circumstances, leaving Ed alone with his aging and increasingly frail mother. The loss of his brother was a significant blow, but it was the beginning of a series of events that would unravel Ed's already fragile psyche. Augusta, bedridden and reliant on Ed for her every need, became even more controlling and verbally abusive. Her domineering presence loomed large over Ed, suffocating him with her demands and expectations. The weight of her expectations and the fear of incurring her wrath pressed down on Ed, pushing him further into his shell of isolation and despair. He became a prisoner in his own home, trapped by the very person he sought to care for. Then, in December of that same year, Augusta Gein breathed her last. Her death marked the end of an era for Ed, an era defined by control and subjugation. For Ed, it was as if the world had come crashing down around him. The one constant in his life, the person who had shaped his every thought and action, was gone. His anchor, his protector, the sole object of his twisted affection was gone. He was left to navigate a world that he had never truly understood, a world that now seemed even more terrifying and alien. He was utterly alone, adrift in a world he never understood and deeply feared. The isolation that had once been imposed by his mother now became a self-imposed exile. His grief, however, was not that of a grieving son, but of a fanatic who had lost his idol. Augusta had been more than a mother to Ed. She had been a deity, a figure of worship and fear. He sealed off the rooms she frequented, preserving them as shrines to her memory, frozen in time. These rooms became sacred spaces, untouched and unaltered, a testament to her enduring influence. Augusta's death unhinged something in Ed Gein's mind. The already fragile barriers of his sanity began to crumble, giving way to a torrent of dark and twisted thoughts. The already fragile barriers of his sanity crumbled, and he began to construct a world of his own making, a world where his morbid fascinations could flourish unchecked. In the solitude of his home, he gave life to his darkest fantasies. He became fixated on death, on the human form in its most vulnerable state. His fascination with the macabre grew, consuming his every thought and action. He began to frequent the local cemeteries, not to pay respects to the departed, but to exhume their remains. The graveyards became his playground, a place where he could indulge his morbid curiosities without fear of judgment. The graveyards, once places of peace and remembrance, became his hunting grounds, feeding his macabre obsessions. The desecration of graves became a ritual, a way for Ed to feel a sense of control and power in a world that had always seemed beyond his grasp. The once peaceful nights in Plainfield were about to be haunted by a spectre far more terrifying than any superstitious tale. Driven by a compulsion he could neither understand nor control, Ed Gein began to make regular visits to the local cemeteries under the cover of darkness. Armed with shovels and a morbid sense of purpose, he desecrated graves, his mind consumed by the grotesque desire to collect the remains of the recently deceased. The darkness offered him a cloak of anonymity, but more importantly, it mirrored the darkness that had seeped into his soul. The freshly turned earth, the scent of decay, the silence of the tombstones all fueled his twisted desires. He wasn't driven by a need for wealth. The graves he chose weren't those of the rich and famous. He was drawn to middle-aged women, women who reminded him of his mother, women he could mold and shape in his twisted imagination. Each stolen corpse, each carefully exhumed bone became a perverse trophy, a testament to his descent into madness. He would bring his gruesome bounty back to his farmhouse, the once unremarkable dwelling now transforming into a charnel house of horrors. The townsfolk remained oblivious, their trust in the quiet odd jobber blinding them to the monster lurking in their midst. November 16, 1957. Bernice Warden, the owner of a local hardware store, goes missing. Her last customer, Ed Gein. When police arrived at his farmhouse to investigate, they had no idea what they were walking into, but what they found inside would forever change the way we think about evil. In the shed, they found Bernice Warden's body, decapitated, hanging upside down like a butchered animal. Inside the house, the walls were lined with human remains, artifacts from the graves Ed had robbed and the women he had murdered. But the most shocking discovery, the suit of human skin sewn together piece by piece. Ed Gein wasn't just a murderer, he was creating his own twisted version of life and death. The news of Gein's arrest sent shockwaves through the nation. It wasn't just the sheer brutality of his crimes, it was the horrifying reality that someone who seemed so harmless, so quiet, could be capable of such unspeakable evil. He confessed to 2 murders, but authorities knew the grave robbing spanned far deeper than that. Ed Gein wasn't just a killer, he was a monster hidden in plain sight. Ed Gein was declared legally insane and spent the rest of his life in a mental institution where he died in 1984. But his story didn't die with him. It lived on, echoing through American pop culture, inspiring some of the most terrifying characters in film history: Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. Each of them, in one way or another, was born from the horrors of Ed Gein, the quiet handyman who created a legacy of fear that has never been forgotten. Hollywood turned his crimes into nightmares that would haunt generations. But no film, no character could ever truly capture the darkness that lived inside Ed Gein. Today the farmhouse is gone. Nothing remains of the place where Ed Gein carried out his unspeakable acts, but his legacy, that remains. Because the scariest monsters aren't the ones we see on the screen, they're the ones we never suspect. The ones hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy. And in Ed Gein's case, that mask was made of human skin.